As with most interactive type of experience that you would be working with, you want the people who are going to be taking these surveys to have the most personalized experience as possible. Now, this could be something as simple as just customizing the details on the survey to include things like their name, or maybe the name of the person that they were interacting with, or even just kind of generalized information about the organization that they're coming from. The other situation that you might want to look at from a personalized standpoint is really modifying the experience. So while they're taking that survey, maybe I want to point them in different directions based upon how they answer the question. So maybe I have a bunch of different elements that are in there, and if somebody went through the entire survey, maybe that's 40 questions. But if they answer a question a certain way, now we've exponentially remove that down from 40 questions to just 10 questions, because this is the only relevant information that's appropriate to them based upon how they're working. The other situation that you might want to be looking at is just, how you want to report on what's happening. So based upon how people are answering questions, do we need to do something specific inside the application to relate to that? And so there's a lot of different ways that can be accomplished using the voice of the customer solution. And so in this module, we're going to look at some of those different elements in regards to things like linking survey questions. So from a reporting standpoint, how can we tie together different questions from either the same survey or multiple surveys together so we can use them from a more detailed reporting perspective? How do we personalize that experience? So Voice of the Customer has a concept of what's called piped data, which actually allows us to pipe in more personalized information into the survey. So as they're taking that, we can make that kind of a direct correlation to who that person is that's working through it. How do we use response routing feature to find a better way to customize that experience? And like I said, that might be as simple as using a client-side rule to redirect somebody to a different element within the survey, or that might be more of what they call server-side routing options, which might perform some specific type of action or create some specific type of record inside Dynamics 365 that will facilitate, a response based upon how they've answered a specific question. So one of the things to think about when you're working through this is, how does this question relate to other questions? And so you might have a situation like, for example, like agent politeness. You might have 10 or 15 different questions that somehow address how polite an agent was through the context of what they're working through. These questions might work through different, 5 or 6 different surveys. So you've got these questions kind of all over. The nice thing about these linking questions is now, based upon that reporting text, I could link different questions together, ultimately looking at what the question is, but based upon a specific category, now people have the ability to answer that. Now, when you create a link questions, what's kind of neat about that is those questions can be in the same survey, so I can have questions linked together that reside in the same option, or I could link questions together through different surveys. So maybe I have totally different surveys that are going out to different audiences, but the end result is still the same. I want to know how polite my agents are as they're interacting with our customers. The other thing to remember when you start linking questions together is you have to define it as a linked question. So when you're creating the question, and you probably saw that in the demo a little bit, there's an option there to create it as a linked question. Once you define it as a linked question and you save it as a linked question, then you can actually go in and link other questions to it. So it's kind of a two-tier process. You have to say, okay, this is going to be a question that's going to have the ability to be linked to other questions, but I have to save it first, and then once I've defined that, now other questions in my survey could be directly linked to it. Now, the other thing that's nice is when I import sections into my survey, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that. When you import sections into your survey, all of the questions can automatically be imported and linked into that new page. So as long as those questions are defined as linked questions, you can actually go ahead and have them automatically linked. Now, if you decide after the fact that, they really shouldn't have been linked to this particular question, you do have the capabilities to go out and redefine what those linked options are, but it gives you a lot of different options basically when you're working through it. So let's go ahead and look at that linking process a little bit. I've got my agent information. So let's look at this first question that we created earlier. So how would I rate the agent's knowledge? So I'm going to go in and edit this. And I'm going to come down to my linked question option. And I'm going to create this or make this a linked question. And from a reporting standpoint, I'm just going to call this agent knowledge. And now I'm going to save this. So now I have a situation where it shows me that the linked question is, how would you rate your agent's knowledge? And that's fine because that's the question. It's linked to itself. That's not a problem. But now let's create another question that would be in regards to the agent knowledge. So now I'm going to go ahead and go into my rating option again. And in this case, let's call this, how would you rate the agent's knowledge of your company? And we'll save it. Now I can come into here and I can edit this question, and now I can define this as a linked question. I can specify the question that I want to link it to, which in this case would be, how would I rate the agent's knowledge? And then again, I would still call this So now, as I'm going through, these two questions are tied together. So from a reporting standpoint, this is now going to be kind of a category option that I can pull in and I can look at, and I can now look at all of the overall ratings together as a whole. I can still look at them as individualized questions, but it's really more from a reporting perspective to provide me kind of that extra dimension in regards to what I would want to see as I'm working through this process. Another way that you can personalize the experience of the respondents taking your survey is through what's called piped data. And what you're doing is you're taking specific information and you're just plugging it into your survey. Now, when we talk about piped data, we're not necessarily talking about actual live information from a CRM where we're mapping to a specific field inside Dynamics 365. We're basically talking about name value pairs. So there's a value of user, there's a value of product, service, customer, so on and so forth, and then you specify the value that's going to be associated with that. Now, the value could be a hard-coded value, so from a customer perspective, it could just be the name of the person, or it could be an actual field from Dynamics 365. So out of the box, there's really only 8 fields that are available for piping data into your respondents. Now again, even though they're labeled user, product, service, date, time, they're not necessarily tied to that specific type of data. You realistically could use whatever you wanted for those values. So it gives you the method to tie in 8 personalized pieces of information. The values are defined when the survey is distributed. So when I actually go out and define the email activity that's going to distribute the survey out, those individual pieces will come in. So what you see kind of on the bottom of this screen would be an example of pipe data coming into a survey. So I have thank you for, and it says customer pipe data. For giving us your feedback, and then it goes down and it talks about the case number, which is pulling in information from the other field, and then give us information about your customer service representative, which is pulling information from the user field. Once we map that and we distribute that survey out, now the person taking that survey is going to get to see if their name happens to be Maria or Marie. Thank you, Marie, for giving us your feedback. We hope you were happy. Please take the time to answer a few questions about case number 298724 and the customer service representative that worked with you. In this case, their name was Nancy. So this is the information that's ultimately going to be fed back. So let's look at what that process looks like as far as customizing the experience so you have kind of more detail that you can put in there. We have this, let's tell us about our agent experience. Rather than saying, let's tell us about our agent experience, why don't we say, tell us about your experience with Derek, or tell us about your experience with Tom. So this is where pipe data can really kind of come into that process. So instead of just doing kind of an inline edit, I can come in here and I can do kind of a straight line edit. And this is going to bring me into my editor. So one of the things that you'll see inside here now is obviously I have some control over the font itself, how it's positioned. I can use bulleted lists, those types of things. I can inherit the font and the size from the actual survey question itself. But one of the things that I could do in here now is I could customize this. So I could say, please tell us about your experience with, and now go into my pipe and insert user. So what this is going to say now is it's going to say, tell us about your experience with Derek, or whoever the person was that was directly correlated with that item. Now, this isn't something that is going to be pre-populated. You'll see what that looks like when we distribute the survey, but this gives us the capabilities to provide that personalized experience. So now, in this case, I can go ahead and save this, close out of here. And I could continue that same process. So how would you rate the agent's knowledge? So now I come into here and I do kind of a straight line edit into this, and I change this from how would you rate the agent's knowledge to how would you rate the user's knowledge. And then save that information and close out of there. And I would, if I wanted to, I could go in from a survey perspective and I could come all the way back up to the welcome screen, and I could even personalize this option here that would say, welcome so-and-so, please take a moment to complete our customer survey. The pipe data option really does start to provide that more personalized experience. So you really want to look at how does that fit into what you're trying to do and find ways that you can work that in. Once you've piped all the information into your survey, once we go through and like I said, distribute the survey, that information will come in there. Now, the big thing to remember is when you preview your survey, it's still going to say, user pipe data. It's not going to have all of the personalized information in there, obviously, because you're in a subsequent scenario where you're previewing it. So it's only going to work in situations where you're working through live data. Now, the other thing to remember is, depending upon how you're going to distribute this survey, if this survey is going to have anonymous distribution where you're not going to necessarily know who the respondents are that are taking these surveys, you may not be able to get that truly personalized experience. But if you're doing a customer satisfaction survey that's going to be associated with any time a case is resolved, this is a great way to define that personalized experience, because you're going to typically know who was the person working on the case, who was the person that called in, what's the case number. All of that information would be front and center for you to work with. As people go through and answer these questions and they rate the agent experience or their level of satisfaction with your organization as a whole, you may start to ask them questions like, are you interested in additional products or services? Or are there additional ways that as an organization we could provide service to you? This is where response routing can come in and be very beneficial on a variety of different levels, actually. But what happens is you specify different actions that you want to execute based upon predefined ways that people might answer survey questions. So what ends up happening is respondents can be routed to specific parts of a survey based upon conditions and actions. So there's two types of situations here. The first thing is there's the condition itself. So when somebody answers a specific question, based upon how they answered that question, what do we want to take place? Or maybe if they answer multiple questions a certain way, we can send them to a different area. So one of the things that's kind of neat with the conditions, and we'll show you this a little bit in the demo itself, is there's this concept of and/or conditions, where a condition can say, if this is true and this is true, now I'm going to execute some type of action. Or if this is true or this is true, I'm going to execute some type of action. The editor provides or gives you the capabilities to do either and/or conditions. You cannot do both in a separate response routing scenario. So you would probably have to create different response routing sets for those and/or type functionality, but it at least gives you the mechanism to be able to facilitate that in the application. Now, the other thing that happens is, so once that condition is met, it's going to execute some type of response action in the application. Now, there's two different types of response actions. There's more of a client level response action, and there's more of a server level response action. And we'll talk about both of those on the next couple of slides, but client level is going to be more, inside the survey itself. Server level is going to be more within the context of Microsoft Dynamics 365. What do we want to do? So you can define an option as either, client or server, but once you've defined what that level is, you don't necessarily have the ability to make changes. Now, the other thing that's nice is, depending upon how how that item is responded, you can configure multiple actions per response routing rule. So you can go in and say, okay, if this is true, now we're going to go in and we're going to do this particular situation. And if we maybe need two different things to take place, maybe we need to route them to a specific spot within the application, and then we also need to perform some type of action inside Dynamics 365, I do have that capabilities. Now, before we go in and show you exactly what this process would look like, let's just talk a little bit more about the different response actions that you would be looking at. So the first one is more of the client side situation. So when you talk about kind of a client-side scenario, these are specific to an individualized survey. So you have to say, here's what I want to take place within the context of that survey itself. And now there's different actions that you can do based upon those situations. So for example, if somebody answers a question a certain way and maybe they've chosen other as an option, I now could choose to display a specific question inside that survey that says, okay, now that you've chosen other, give me some additional information about that. Why did you select other, or what was the items around that? Or maybe there's different visual elements that based upon how they've worked through it, I just don't need anymore in that survey. So now I'm going to hide different pieces or components to that survey. But I also have a lot of capabilities to start chaining things together. So I might have different sections inside that survey that are on different pages or different areas. One of the things that's nice about this is I can skip to specific areas, or if they answer a question a certain way, I can skip the remaining parts of the survey altogether, and I could just choose to end the survey. I have the ability to link to another survey. So I can chain to another survey and say, okay, now that you've responded this way, I'm going to take you into our more products section. And when I take you into our more products section, now you're going to go into that survey and you're going to be able to define what specific products or items you want to work with. Or I can toggle visibility. You saw that each survey element that we work with has a visibility option that we can work with. So these response actions give us a lot of flexibility around how we're going to work through those individualized components. Now, the other thing that you can do is when you're defining these, it needs to know if it's going to guide you through to a different area, it needs to know what that item is that you're working with. So it needs to know what page and what section to guide them to. And then if you want them to guide to, a grid or a question, you have that capability. And when we talk about a grid, we're talking about those scenarios where they can select multiple responses for different items. So you can rate things and you can categorize things on orders of importance. That's what we're talking about when we talk about a grid. So it's different section questions that you could work through. Now, from a response perspective, now I can look at how that response has been basically in there. I can define how I want to, what's the outcome that I want to work with. So for example, let's say for example, somebody does want to unsubscribe to a survey, or maybe somebody wants to have additional information provided to them. So we have a survey question in there that says, are you interested in learning more about our organization? They say yes. I can have a response action that goes out and creates a contact request inside Dynamics 365 that sends a notification to a specific user or to a specific queue inside the application, letting them know that they were looking for more information. Or if somebody answers a certain question a certain way, and maybe they have a low score on that question, I can have a low score flag that comes in there that dictates some type of outcome that now needs to be sent off to a specific user or to a queue, so it understands what's happening. So these are things that the outcome type, you really define what is considered a complaint or what is considered a distress situation. It might vary based upon questions. But what's nice is now this notification or this email information that's going to be sent out gets notified to a specific user or queue. And now, just like you would have in any other facilitation of a CRM or a Dynamics 365 instance, you can now act on that and work through it from there. I have on this area here, if we look back in the application, I can see I have a section of the survey called products and services. And so this just defines some of the different products and services as an organization that we offer. And so this is a real good opportunity for me to use some of my response routing capabilities. So what I can do is, if I'm on the survey itself and I go up into my navigation bar, I'll see an option in here called response routings. This is where I can go ahead and click on response routings and create kind of my response routing rules that I want to work with. Now, I don't necessarily have any defined for this particular survey at this point, so this is where we'll go ahead and define what that process looks like. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a new response route. And I'm going to just specify what do I want to do within this situation. So when it comes up, it's going to ask me, what is the survey that it's tied to and what is the name of this particular situation. So in this case, maybe we'll just call this products or other products. Now the first area that you're going to see in here is the conditions. Now this is just like any other Dynamics 365 record in the fact that before I can really start working with the subgrids that you see in here, I do need to save this. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. And this is going to load up and give me the ability to start working with my conditions and my actions and my kind of otherwise statements. Now you'll notice here that here's my grouping functionality. So we talked about that on the individual slide. I can either do kind of an and condition or I can do an or condition. So I can say, if this condition is true or this condition is true, then we're going to enable the action. If not, then we're going to do something else. In this case, I can only do one or the other. So we'll leave this as kind of a standard group and functionality. So now what I'll do is I'll add my condition. So this will open up kind of a separate editor that I can go in and define the specifics around the condition that I'm looking for. So it shows us, what is the name of the condition. It shows us the response routing that's associated with it. It defaults it to the survey that we're working with from a standardized check. Now it's asking us what question is this response route condition going to be based off of. So now I can look at my individual questions, and this is where I can see, what specific items we would be looking at. In this case, I am going to choose select all items you may be interested in, because this is the question. Now I define my operator. So what am I looking for? Well, in this case, this is a multiple selected option where they can choose specific options that they're working with. So in this case, we're going to choose selected, and then we're going to choose the answer that we're looking for. So I'll look in my lookup scenario, and here's all my different options that I would have from an answer perspective listed out. So I've got audiovisual, business intelligence, cloud solutions. These are all answers to the question that we used when I pre-designed this question ahead of time. So we'll just go ahead and choose other. So if they answer this question with a status of other, what exactly do I want to accomplish? So I'm going to go ahead and save and close this. Now, if I wanted to provide additional situations around this, I certainly could. And you'll notice there's different operators and different scenarios based upon what they might be able to select within the context of that option. But from here, we'll just go ahead and kind of leave it as it is. Then I'm going to go ahead and go down to my actions. So if somebody says, yes, they're interested in other products, or they have other products that they're interested in, now I need to define kind of my response action. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit add, do my lookup scenario. I don't really have any options here, so we'll just go ahead and create a new response action. And this is where I have the ability to define this as either a client-based action or a server-based action. And once I specify which one it is, I don't have the ability to change it. So in this case, we're going to specify it more as a client action. So I'll go ahead and click on client. I'll give it a name. We'll call this other product. Then I'll come down to my item and define what is the survey that this is going to be based off of. Well, this is going to be based off of my standard customer service survey that I created. The action that's going to be displayed with on this is going to be show, because I want to show a specific item. So what do I want to show? Well, I want to show a specific page. The page that I want to show is the products and services page on the survey. The section that contains that particular item is the please provide us with additional details on products. And now I can choose a specific question. And the question that I want to display is, if other, please specify. So what will happen is this item was set to, from a visibility perspective, to not be visible upon initial situation. So now it's going to go ahead and specify that. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. Now, if I wanted to, I would also have the capabilities to go through and kind of create a default action on this as well. Let's just verify that this has been added. There we go. I could specify a default action. Now in this point, I don't necessarily need my default action. It's not that big of a deal. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and leave it as it is. Then I'll go ahead and close out of here, and then I can move on to kind of my next area. So I'm going to close out of my action. Here's my option that is associated with this, and now I could create another one. And let's just do one more here real quick so you can see some of the other options. So I'm going to add one more response to this. And in this case, we will say more product info. We'll make this a group and again. We'll go ahead and save it. And we'll add another condition. And so in this case, we're going to say if somebody answers the question, would you be interested in learning more about the products we provide? If they answer this with, let's say, yes, I want to do something. So what do I want to do? So in this case, we'll go ahead and hit save and close. Now I'm going to define my action. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add my action. You'll see that I have this other product info action that I could use because they are reusable once you've created them. In this case, I don't necessarily need to reuse this, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. And this will also be a client one. We'll call this skip to products. We'll associate it with this same survey. We'll specify the action as skip to. We'll specify the page that we want to skip to. In this case, we want to skip to products and services. We want to skip to the please provide us additional services options. And I could even direct them straight to the question, select all items that you may be interested in. So this is going to take them right to that option in the survey. Now I can go ahead and hit save and close. Add this into my option. And then I could create kind of an otherwise action. So if they don't answer it that way, basically I just need to end the survey. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on my add response action, create one final new one here real quick. Make this a client option that's going to skip to the end. The survey is, again, my standard customer satisfaction survey. My action is end survey. And then save and close. And then add this as my finalized action. So this is where I now really have the ability to consume kind of what this process looks like. So now I've got this option in here. I could close out of here. And now if I go back to kind of my standard survey, I could preview the survey and then I could run the information from there. So now I would have the capabilities to go back into the survey itself and then, kind of work through that. So we'll go ahead and before we do that, I'll show you kind of a quick little demo on the server aspect of it, and then we'll show you how it all kind of comes together at the end. The other option that we have would be the server-based situation. So instead of interacting with this survey from a client perspective, now I actually want to physically do something within the context of the application based upon how they answer that question. Concepts is very similar, but let's, for example, look at this, how satisfied are you with our organization? So select the value that best describes your relationship with us. If somebody selects this at a very low score, I want to be notified of that so we can actually do something with that. So now what I'm going to do in this situation is I'm going to go back into my response routing. I'm going to create a new response route. And from a conditional standpoint, it's the same generalized principle that we used to this point. I'm going to create the option. I'm going to define what the condition is that we're looking at, but then I'm going to specifically define what the server-based analysis option is based upon that option. So we'll go ahead and add the new response route. Give it just a sec here. So we'll design this, like I said, just the way that we would normally have gone in. So in this case, we'll call this satisfaction. We'll save it. We'll establish our condition. And we'll say that if the question, select the value that best describes your relationship with us. If the operator is less than, let's say 4. So if it's less than 4, we've got a problem. So now we're going to go ahead and hit save and close. And what do we want to do in this situation? Well, in this case, we want to do an action. And we'll add a new action. This is going to be a server-based action. So we'll go ahead and choose server from our server action. We'll call this unhappy client. Now this is a little bit different because now I have what's called a response outcome type. So what has kind of happened with this situation? Well, they're a low score, so we want to notify that we had a low score. We could also call this a distress if we wanted to. Really, I have any options that I want, but we'll call this kind of a distress notification. So I'm going to send a distress notification out as part of the system. Well, who am I going to send it to? Well, I'm going to send it from Derek. This is who it's going to come from. Now I can also specify the other email address that I would want to send this information. So the primary, if I have an email address for the entity itself, I could associate it with the email address from that entity. In this case, I can also specify, do I want this distress outcome to be sent to a specific user within the application, or do I have a queue inside my organization that I want to work with? And here I do have a queue that we want to work with, and we'll just go ahead and we'll set that queue up for the, we'll just say channel sales option. And now I can go ahead and hit save and close. So now we've determined that, okay, this is a distressed customer, so now we're going to do more of a server-based action, and between the two, now I can have multiple different situations taking place. So now that I have everything in place to here, I can go ahead and I've saved my option. I can close out of here. I could go back to my survey if I wanted to. And now this would be an ideal situation to go ahead and preview the survey to see how my functionality works. So now I can go ahead and preview my survey. So now once it's loaded up, I'll go ahead and I'll just kind of follow through my survey. So we'll go ahead and we'll enter our information in. I'll answer my information. So yep, everything was fine, normal, good. I go ahead and hit next. So what best describes our relationship? I'll set that to 3. Come over here and say 9. Now, this is that part where we've got our information in there. So would I be interested in learning more about products and services we offer? If I say yes, and now I hit next, it brings me right to my next visual element where I could interact with this particular piece. If I hit previous and I go to no, now when I hit next, it's going to complete my survey because it's going to say, I'm done. The response routing was to go to the end of the survey. So this is where you can kind of start to define what those individual situations look like. Now, had we gone into the other, we would have been able to have that extend off and work through information from there. But these response routing actions are just a terrific way that you can really personalize the experience that people are going to see when they're going through. As you're going through and designing these individual elements, there's just a lot of facets that you can use to tailor how that information is going to be reported and how you're going to personalize the experience. And I would really encourage you to look at which one of those options are going to fit best based upon your audience. And remember that, if you're using linked questions, it does give you the capabilities to use that from a reporting perspective. So we gave the example of the agent satisfaction or the agent knowledge. If I'm trying to gauge just an overall perspective on how knowledgeable my agents are, this gives me the nice capabilities to look at all of those options underneath that linked question category to be able to finalize and see that. If I'm really looking to personalize information, I can pipe data into my survey questions. So once I initiate kind of that initial response out to the information, those pipe data will be filled with customized data coming from either items that we've declared within the application or from inside Dynamics 365. And we'll do a little bit more of that on the next module. But the other major item that we really talked about in this module was the concept of response routing, defining what you want to do or what actions you want to take based upon how people answer questions. And that's where you really can start to provide that dynamic experience for your respondents as they're going in, consuming, and taking these individual surveys.